The definition for the word presupposition means it is what we believe to be true. So if we look at the presuppositions of neuroagility, we mean what are the foundational principles for neuroagility as such. And our first foundational principle for neuroagility is that the brain and the mind is one functional system. So if we look at the brain means it is that mass of nerve tissue that resides in the skull. It integrates sensory information and direct motor responses. It is your center for learning and thinking. But when we look at the definition of mind means it is the sum total of your mental processes, thoughts, and your consciousness. It is the sum total of our thoughts, emotions, behavior, intelligence, and so forth. The brain is an organ, but your mind isn't. The brain is the physical place where the mind resides. There is a constant interplay between brain and mind. What happens in the brain will impact the mind, and what happens in the mind will impact the brain. There's a constant interaction of brain and mind. To give you an example, an emotion is a feeling. What is it that we feel? A specific chemical that is released that makes us feel good or bad or focused or whatever the case may be. The brain and mind is one functional system, and it can't be seen as two separate entities. Neuro-Agility is about integrating the functions of the physical brain regions with the mental faculties of the mind. That is our first presupposition. When we have a look at the next presupposition or the foundational principle of Neuro-Agility, it's all about potential. And our view of potential is that potential is an indication of who a person can be, but not necessarily of who that person is. Your potential is the sum total of the brain-based, or differently stated, the neurophysiological elements you have a predisposition for that influence how you think, learn, communicate, and process information. It is referred to as your neurodesign. Your neurodesign is the blueprint for how you are unique and the predispositions that you have in terms of how you prefer to learn, to think, to process information, and to communicate. We all think, learn, and solve problems, but in different ways based on our unique neurological design. The third presupposition in terms of what neuroagility is all about is neuroagility is a competence that you develop. All people can be neuroagile, but they are not born neuroagile. Neuroagility is a competence that you develop. As much as an athlete has to practice to become fit and flexible to perform at optimum level, as much you need to develop brain fitness and mental flexibility to have a fast, flexible, and a focused mind that can learn, think, and solve problems quickly and easy. Our fourth supposition is that neuroagility very strongly correlates to increased performance. Research and case studies confirm that increasing the ease, speed, and flexibility with which we think, learn, and process information increases productivity, optimizes performance like memory and concentration, as well as it reduces your risk for error. So these are the foundational principles that forms the underlying basis for the whole construct of what neuroagility is all about. But the next very important aspect of neuroagility, it is not just a concept. There is a very strong framework for what neuroagility is all about. Neuroagility is about having a fast, focused and flexible mind, which means we want to process information, think and learn very quickly, fast and easy. In order to do that, there are many brain-based elements that will influence the ease and speed with which we learn, think and process information. So the framework of neuroagility stands on two legs. And the first leg is all about the drivers that will impact your brain performance. Those things that will have an impact on the ease and speed with which we transmit electrochemical messages from one brain cell to another. Now, there are many drivers, but these drivers and the interplay between these drivers will truly have an impact on ease and speed with which we think and learn and effectively communicate. The first one is called brain agility. And brain agility just means that the different brain regions are all processing information simultaneously. And maybe the best way to illustrate this, as you are looking at me, just do the following exercise with me. Clap your hand, cross your hands, touch your nose and your ear. Now switch over to the other side. Just do this movement activity with me. And why I'm asking you to do this with me is to get an experience of what brain agility is all about. How easy was that for you and how fast could you do it? The left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, right controls left. So to do a simple movement activity like this means I need to utilize both hemispheres simultaneously, equally in order to do this activity. So in terms of brain optimization, that's our point of departure. We have to have an agile brain where all brain regions are functioning at optimum level. The next driver that's very important is our ability to cope with stress. Stress is going to be a phenomena that will always be prevalent in our lives, especially in a VUCA world, in a world of constant disruptive changes. And stress means we produce certain chemicals, which we call cortisol, that in the medium term has a limiting effect on the ease and speed with which we transmit electrochemical messages from one brain cell to another. It can either slow it down, or even in severe cases of stress, it may even block electrical transmission and communication between brain cells. So obviously, learning the skills to cope well with stress and prevent that slowdown or the hindrance of electrical transmission between cells is going to be crucial. So stress coping mechanisms is not just there to make us feel better, but to literally regulate electrical transmission between cells. So if we do not lose control, which we refer to as stress, is when we feel that we are losing control. When my brain cells are not effectively getting those messages through, that's going to slow us down. But if we learn good skills to even cope well with stress during disruptive change, we can still think and learn fast and easy. So a very important driver. We may even be brain agile, but if we do not have good stress coping mechanisms, that lack of stress coping mechanisms may actually neutralize our brain agility. Another important driver of brain performance is sleep, because we need chemicals between the different brain cells that helps us transmit electrochemical impulses from one brain cell to another. And those neurotransmitters are produced when we go into a deep dreamless sleep and also when we sleep long enough. So not just sleeping long enough, but also deep enough is a very important prerequisite for your brain to function at optimum level. And if our sleeping patterns are not at optimum level, it will significantly impact the ease and speed with which we learn, think, and process information. Another driver is movement and exercise. We love Dr. Paul Dennison refers to this as movement is the door to learning. Because when we move, we produce neurotransmitters. The movement activates the thinking centers of our brain. When we do stretching-related movement activities, it impacts our focus and concentration very positively. So we need to significantly move, not just once a day when we do exercise, but throughout the day. And also often stand up and do a lot of movements in order to get the most out of our brain and to facilitate that electrical transmission between your neurons. But then your mindset, in other words, the way that you habitually think, your attitude, that has a crucial impact on your brain performance. And here we have to remember that the chemicals that regulate our thinking and also the neural pathways that we establish all the time in the white and gray matter of our brain will have a significant impact on how effectively, fast and easy we think. So a limited mindset, a negative mindset, when we are pessimistic and don't have hope for the future, literally puts us in the box. We imprison our brain when we think in boxes, when we maintain limited thinking. But neuroscience research tells us that when we have constructive mindsets like growth mindsets and showing gratitude and being optimists who have hope for the future, it helps us to produce the right neurotransmitters and the neural networks that is going to improve our agile mindset. And an agile mindset is a prerequisite for us to be change agile, to cope with very challenging new situations. So your mindset is a crucial driver for brain performance, for optimized brain performance. Even if I'm brain agile and I cope well with stress and my sleeping patterns are fine, but if my neural networks actually limits the ease and speed with which I think and learn, then it neutralizes the impact of all the other drivers that I have mentioned to you before. Your brain produces 20 to 25 watts of electricity. And this energy, this electricity comes from a combination of the oxygen you breathe, the water you drink, and the food that you eat. Because we generate and produce those neurotransmitters and the water that facilitates electrical transmission. It all comes from the food that we eat and the water that we drink. So the food we eat is a very important driver in having optimized brain performance. But so far, I have only discussed with you one leg of the Neuro-Agility framework, and that's the drivers that impact your brain performance. The sum total of these drivers that impact your brain performance will indicate what we, in general terms, refer to as your overall brain fitness. So if you want to improve brain fitness, you need to optimize the drivers that I have discussed with you here. The next leg that the Neuro-Agility framework stands on is all about what we refer to as a new construct called your neurological design. Now, your neurological design is the sum total of the brain-based elements that influence how you think, how you learn, how you are smart, and how you process information. And the sum total of these components, these 7 components, will impact your mental flexibility and your ability to be able to be analytical and creative at the same time. So there are 7 elements that we have identified that impacts your mental flexibility. But your neurological design, which we refer to in a nutshell as neurodesign, also is an indication of your potential. So potential is an indication of who you can be. Who you can be depends on what your neurological design looks like. We all learn, but in different ways. We all think, but in different ways. We are all smart, but in different ways. And it's all based on your neurological blueprint. And these are the components that impact your neurological blueprint. The first component's all about your relative lateral dominance. But here we mean your preference for utilizing critical and creative thinking at the same time. Neuro-Agility is about being logical and creative, analytical and innovative at the same time. But very often, because of our neurological design, people have a natural default mode in order to solve problems, to think and to learn. So we all solve problems, but some people will start from an analytical, detailed, logical approach and then move into the big picture if they are neuro-agile. Others may start with a big picture and then backtrack into the details. But that's fine as long as we utilize both hemispheres simultaneously. But if we are not brain agile, if some of these drivers that I've discussed with you is not going to be in place, it is going to negatively impact the simultaneous processing and functioning of your brain. And that may then result in people kicking into the one default mode or the other. So now I follow more a logical approach or a creative approach, but not both simultaneously. And that will negatively impact your mental flexibility. So another component that is essential in terms of our mental flexibility is about how expressive and receptive we are. Expressive means I express my thoughts and emotions and I reason in expressive ways in order to solve a problem. But receptive means I absorb, I listen, and I think and process before I respond. Both these modes are the opposite sides of one coin. And we need to be both depending on what a changing situation requires of us. There are times that we have to stand up and make our statement and express, but there are times that we have to be quiet, observe, listen, first process, think, and then respond. So it's never a question of being the one or the other, but a question of being both if we are neuro-agile. But because of drivers and stress and fatigue, we may sometimes kick into a default mode. And that then is going to negatively impact our mental flexibility. So another perspective on our mental flexibility is when we look at the figurative modes of thinking and learning. And the figurative modes mean that some modes may require of us to be very logical, structured, and detailed. Other modes make us more task-oriented, results-oriented, and focused on an outcome. Another figurative thinking mode is to be more people, relationships-oriented. And another thinking mode may be to be more conceptual, creative, innovate, change, looking at different options. Now, we can and should activate all these different points of departures in thinking, all these figurative thinking and learning modes. But even if we do, based on our neurological design, there will normally be a sequence to how people prefer to do it. But if we develop mental flexibility, we'll be able to access and utilize all the different figurative learning and thinking modes. But even if we do, our point of departure will differ based on our neurological design. But ultimately, we want to develop those skills to develop all these different figurative modes of thinking and learning so we can access and utilize them based on what changing situations require of us. Then we often hear about people saying be rational or be emotional. As humans, we need to be rational and emotional. We need to flex mental muscle and reason while we take emotions into consideration. But unfortunately, what happens when we experience stress, fatigue, a lack of development, we are not brain agile, we may sometimes get stuck into certain modes. And if we get stuck in being more emotional or more rational, it is going to negatively impact our mental flexibility and our effectiveness to deal with problems and relationships and all those things. So therefore, very important here also that we need flexibility between reasoning and emotions, thinking and feeling all the time. All people absorb information, but we process information in different ways. To give you an example, if we talk about the information processing styles, it is a combination of our brain, eye, ear, hand dominance, and how we absorb information into the brain. The senses are the doors to the brain. But we have different dominant senses. And here, dominance means senses that takes the lead in how we process information. I am looking at you with both eyes, but if I really have to focus, I will do this. So now you see only one eye. This is the eye that leads. The other one is working and seeing, but one leads and one passively follows. But this combination of dominance will have an impact on what we focus on or what we hear. Some people tend to listen more to what we hear, others to how we hear things. Neuro-Agile people pay attention to the what and the how. But even if it's the what and the how, maybe the what leads in one situation, the how in another, and vice versa. So your information processing style has a massive impact on your mental flexibility, but even also on your risk for human error, which we will discuss more later, how that relates to your risk for human error. But when we have different senses on different sides of the body during stress and fatigue, that causes a neurological hindrance of electrical transmission or slows the impulses down, which results into human error. So it's crucial that we understand this design, our blueprint for how we prefer to do things, because it will impact your mental performance and especially your mental flexibility. We all learn, but in different ways. The idea is not, am I visual, auditory, or kinesthetic? But life does not adapt to us. We need to adapt to the world and to changing situations, which means if a situation requires that we need to have a visual processing, learning perspective, and then an auditory and then kinesthetic, we need to have the flexibility to utilize all simultaneously. Whereas some people do sometimes show a preference for being more visually oriented than auditory oriented, sound, or kinesthetic, meaning action or movement. But the idea is to be all at the same time. And then the next component that influences our neurological design are our intelligence preferences. All people are smart, but in different ways. All people are talented, but in different ways. Einstein was science smart. Nelson Mandela was people and intrapersonal smart. But how we are smart will have an impact on how we are talented. And that will impact in which spaces we can have the biggest impact in the world. But ideally, we need to develop that flexibility between all the various intelligences in order to be better versions of ourselves. So even if we have preferences, through learning skills, we can develop anything even the less preferred or our less preferred areas of the brain that we normally would not want to utilize. So the idea in terms of the Neuro-Agility framework is there are many components that interplay with each other. The drivers impact the ease and speed with which we learn and think. So it will impact all the time the neuro-design elements and vice versa. There's this interplay. So it's not just one or two things that we need to do, but holistically looking at all the dynamics that will determine what neuro-agility is and how neuro-agile we are.